In her current solo exhibition at E-WERK, Bunmi Agusto explores the tension between prehistory and the present by using modern, simple materials to evoke ancient cave paintings. By interweaving primeval narratives with futuristic aesthetics, Agusto invites viewers into a space where the boundaries of time blur and the eternal cycle of existence is reinterpreted through the lens of antiquity and modernity. The focus of Agusto's work is thus on the narrative, which she expresses through various media. In her artistic practice, Agusto combines painting, drawing, and printmaking to create vivid compositions of a fantasy world she calls Within. Within is a paracosmos in the artist's mind that serves as a repository for everything she encounters in her waking life. The figures in her works are often family members, friends, and passers-by who are drawn from reality into her world as migrants, transcending reality through their encounters with her. Within is thus a reflection of her own inner life, as she uses the otherworldly, interwoven landscapes as a place to explore psychology, cultural theory, spirituality, and the development of the self through the lens of fantasy. She mainly publishes her texts herself on her Substack with the name In Search of Magic, where she explores fantasy and magical storytelling from ancient and modern times. She researches comparative mythology, often linking myths and folk tales with scientific theories. She has written essays for Dada magazine and for the Nigerian Pavilion at the London Design Biennale 2025, for which she was hired as a cultural contributor. Following her research and writings on the remediation of Egungun masquerades in contemporary Nigerian art, she curated the exhibition Masking the Unseen at Miliki in Lagos. She is also an avid gamer and attributes her love of world building to games such as The Sims and The Legend of Zelda. Her fascinating with world building extends beyond fantastical context and into the realm of architecture. As an architecture enthusiast and researcher, she collaborated with young aspiring Nigerian architects, Yana, to create a website that serves as a digital resource for the architectural history of Nigeria and West Africa. So long, so far. It's already a lot that I told you. And I think it's not a brief, but a long overview. And it gives you a wonderful impression of Bunmi Agusto's multifaceted work. And I'm sure you're looking forward to hearing the essays the artist will read to us. I now give the floor to Bunmi Agusto.
Hello, hi, Stephanie. Thank you for the great introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. Can you hear me? Everything good? Yeah, okay, great. So I'm going to be reading my essay, The Spiritual Mechanics of Within, which serves as a philosophical proposition about the nature of our existence. And I will begin now. When I have shared the underpinnings of my practice with others in recent months, I have often been referred to as a philosopher. I'm definitely too shy to call myself a philosopher, but I am a curious person. Perhaps my reluctance stems from viewing philosophy in too institutionalized a manner. If a philosopher is someone who simply seeks wisdom and often questions the nature of reality, then maybe I am one after all. And so I will share with you the underpinnings of my work, underpinnings that have led others to call me a philosopher, even if I am still learning to wear the title myself. My artworks and exhibitions in the last 2.5 years have particularly focused on establishing a framework of spirituality in my paracosm within. Over the years, my process has involved studying psychology and cultural theory, but more recently, it has expanded to cross-referencing myths and folklore with scientific theories in order to understand how ancient knowledge of the divine mechanics of our universe has been embedded within fantasy and magical storytelling. These myths were tools of preservation used to pass down ancient wisdom through generations. Consequently, the story I tell of within follows the same tradition, an allegory in which philosophical theories concerning the nature of our existence are encoded. For those unfamiliar, within is a paracosm housed in my mind, an imagined world that serves as the focal point of my artistic practice. Since early 2020, I have been unraveling its lore through drawing, painting, and printmaking and writing. According to its growing mythology, within was created by the iteration of myself that existed in the immediacy of my birth. This primordial self is called O, a complex entity embodying the echoes of past lives I may have lived and the myriad ancestors whose biological coding shapes my DNA.
One second, could you read just very slowly, because I think the transmission of the sound is not so good, so that we can really understand the depth of your work. Thank you so much.
No problem. As I continue to exist as Olubunmi, O withdrew into the crevices of my subconscious to create and inhabit within. The Yoruba equivalent of this internal world is Ori, a word that translates into head, but more expansively signifies the individual spark of consciousness. The Wikipedia page on Ori states, it is also believed that Ori be worshipped like an Orisha, which is a god in Yoruba culture. When things are not going right, Ori should be consulted. To make things right, Ori should be appeased. This is because whatever one becomes, or whatever happens in one's life, is as destined by Ori. Therefore, within is appropriately situated in my head, because Ori literally translates into head. And in line with the conceptions of Ori, O's role in within gradually assumes the mantle of an ancestral deity, one that resides both in the spiritual realm and is simultaneously the world itself. This reflects a pantheist ideology, recognizing multiple cosmologies where reality, the universe, and nature are intrinsically divine. Many mythologies, Mayan, Chinese, Mesopotamian, Hindu, Norse, describe the earth as the body of a god or primordial being. Some even draw parallels between the natural world and the human form. Soil as skin, grass as hair, tree branches as bronchi. My drawings of within embrace this same philosophy, replacing grass with hair, restoring skin to soil, and weaving a cosmos where the self and the world are one. Braids wave through the breeze like plants in Tip of the Psyche, as shown on the screen. And loose coils form afro bushes in works like Displacements Under a Full Cowrie. The recurring brown and black color palettes in my work can therefore be interpreted as representations of sustainable architectural practices. This reflects my personal philosophies on building intentionally, for oneself and with great respect for nature and climate, through the lens of architecture and world building. Within is a world deeply infused with ancestral memory and spiritual consciousness, and my use of earthy hues gestures towards structures that harmonize with nature, embodying a cyclical relationship between material, space, and identity. Since O is embedded in the landscape of within, their presence is often marked by translucent printed hands extending from the braids of the world's terrain. These braided arms perform divine tasks and interventions across my works. as seen with the work on the screen. In assembling the stars, O's hands are seen arranging cowrie stars in the sky, foreshadowing a later body of work that will explore the relationship between astronomy and the divine. In Inroji's Notes 1.3, when O's hands crush apparitions in the physical realm, they leave behind deposits of dark skin clay, a celestial dust with magical capabilities. Inroji, a key figure in my work, later harvests these deposits in Creation of the Masquerades, shown on the screen at the moment. Crafting cloaks that bestow supernatural powers, 4 other hybrid characters go on to don these cloaks and immediately swap bodies with ghost clouds in the spiritual realm, offering a fantastical answer to the question of where the masquerade performer's soul goes when a deceased spirit is believed to inhabit the performer's body. And these are some further examples in these works. With ghost clouds and palm trees, Lands of the Living marks my solo exhibition in 2024, marks my first significant proposition of the spiritual mechanics of within. In Inroji's Notes, a series of pencil and ink drawings on cotton rag paper, I began explaining these mechanics by mapping mythological frameworks onto graph axes. As illustrated in Inroji's Notes 1.1, the first work on the screen at the moment, the spiritual realm exists above the x-axis, whilst the material realm lies below it. This positioning casts the x-axis as a threshold between the two realms, whilst the y-axis functions as axis mundi, the celestial pole connecting heaven and earth. Across mythologies, axis mundi often manifests in natural forms: mountains, trees, and sacred sites. Yggdrasil in Norse mythology, Mount Sinai in the Bible, Mount Hira in Islam. These are examples of the sacred cosmic bridge between the realms, where the divine accesses the material realm. In Yoruba cosmology, the palm tree occupies this role. In his essay, The Tree That Centers the World, Ayodeji Ogunaike explains that the Orishas would descend to the earth via the palm tree and return to the heavens using the same route. Subsequently, I explained the palm tree as axis mundi and within, and in palm tree as axis mundi as wormhole, the drawing on the right. I drew parallels between the mythological concept of axis mundi and the mathematical graph of a wormhole, which connects two planes. I often denote the cosmic x-axis using an interlacing border. This interlacing border motif appears frequently in Benin art history, the cultural legacy of my mother, representing the weaving of the physical and spiritual. Its undulating pattern also echoes ocean waves, which is fitting, as bodies of water often serve as thresholds between realms, from the Yoruba conceptions of spiritual crossings in and out of afterlife, to the metaphysical journeys along the river Styx and the Nile in Greek and Egyptian mythologies. The role of water as a threshold between realms will be a major theme in my upcoming exhibitions, as I continue studying how the divine manifests in nature through the 5 classical elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Water, a conduit between worlds, mirrors its literal function in shaping and sustaining life. The water cycle itself evokes reincarnation, much like how spirits exist in constant motion. This is why I depict spirits and ghosts as clouds, ephemeral, ever-shifting entities that hover between states of matter, just as spirits exist between realms. This untetheredness to the material realm aligns with pop culture depictions of ghosts as translucent floating beings. In January, following my residency at Janan Tamsna, a hotel in Marrakesh surrounded by towering palm trees, I presented Dialogue Between Two Clouds, a series of drawings depicting ghost clouds drifting amongst palm trees. These spirits engage in a philosophical exchange about form and identity, beginning with one cloud asking the other, "Would you return to your dust body?" A question of reincarnation. This term dust body returns to my world-building practice as a reflection of pantheist ideologies, where soul and human body are often metaphysically equivalent. The notion of the dust body references the many cosmologies across the world that describe human creation as a divine act during which a deity sculpts humanity from soil and breathes life into it. In this framework, the dust body is not merely flesh, but a vessel for divine breath, a notion that resonates with the classical elements of air and the concept of spirit itself. Through these connections, my work continues to explore the cyclical nature of existence, where the body returns to the earth and the breath, the essence, remains in motion. Even with my static mixed media drawings, within often reflects motion. Braids sway in unseen breezes, clouds drift, figures are depicted mid-action. This ceaseless motion reminds viewers that within is not a fixed world. It is alive, evolving. During a recent studio visit, a guest who called me philosopher went on to ask me, "Why are you an artist then?" I answered, "Because visual is a language that I speak." This essay, The Spiritual Mechanics of Within, is both a literal explanation of my world's mechanics, as well as a philosophical study of comparative mythology. Within exists at the intersection of storytelling, cosmology, and philosophy through visual language, and it is a testament to the ways our conceptions of the universe overlap across cultures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bunmi, for this reading. And my first question is, I'm very curious to learn more about your statement that, as we talked already about it, through your art, you are telling stories. You say that each of your exhibitions is a new chapter in this ongoing story. So you are telling stories through your visual art and also, since recently, through written texts. What inspired you to start writing alongside your visual art?
So it's often something that I debated. I think when you're an artist, sometimes you're discouraged from writing because it's often suggested that you're then just creating illustrations, which they don't mean positively, unfortunately. So for me, I for a long time I started with depicting the works, and with each solo exhibition, I experimented with ways of using text to enhance the work. So for both my first and second solo exhibitions, I had these mind maps in the exhibition that showed words and themes that I had been exploring with the body of work and the lines connecting them. But however, viewers still found that rather complex, still not straightforward. And I think over time, because my work is still colorful and vibrant and aesthetically pleasing, I just found that a lot of people were interacting with the work on that aesthetic level without understanding the full philosophical conversation that I was having. So it wasn't until September last year, I think, that I started writing. I started my Substack, and it started from a very private place of just being like, this is my point of view. This is my approach. There was also not necessarily trying to explain away my works. It was more so me talking about what I'm looking at and how that's coming into the work, rather than looking at your work and saying this is this, this is this, this is this. So it's just more the overarching abstract ideas.
The American poet Claudia Rankine recently said something in her speech at the Poetry Festival in Berlin, that the image always comes first and then the text. I find this interesting because this is with regard to poetry. So for her, the text is always just an attempt to express an existing image in words. She said that when words are combined with images, it is possible to resist silence, censorship, racism, and discrimination of all kinds. Can you bring this statement in relation to your art? Because you are painting your images. I think the image is before your image, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, the images I present, yes, are of my own internal world, and it's my own worldview. And I was even just answering some questions in an interview similarly that asked me about my influences and the wide range of influences I draw from. So me not necessarily only focusing on maybe European art history or Nigerian art history, but kind of taking from so many places as once, and video games and things that just a lot of references and subject matters that people wouldn't think were linked, and very clearly saying that, hey, if you look at ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs and you look at the screen of video games, you have the same structure of a character moving in a 2D plane. So I'm drawing those sorts of parallels and reintroducing that in my work and having people be able to recognize both influences. So it's, for me, in my writing and in my work, when it comes to those barriers and hierarchies, I like to just approach everything with the same level of respect and same level of care.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this is just already a topic to open it to the audience, so that we have a bit an interaction. I have a lot of questions, but maybe it would be nice to hear already something about, if you're curious about this topic, and if someone wants to ask a question. Is there somebody? Perhaps? Du musst noch anmachen, hochschieben.
No? Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can. Hi.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, thanks a lot for the text and the answers you already gave, and for, of course, the paintings also that we saw. Is there, like, what I was wondering, you spoke about the different, like, a variety of ancient stories, myths, whatever you'd like to call them. Are there some that you feel particularly close to, or do you approach all of them like with the same distance and the same curiosity?
That's a good question. It depends on the point in my life, because, for example, I was having a conversation with my cousin the other day about how he and also men I know are obsessed with ancient Rome, but I am more of an ancient Egypt person. Like as a child, I was very obsessed with ancient Egypt, so that's probably what even led me into archaeology. But these days, I don't remember growing up knowing Yoruba mythology, which is the culture I belong to, my father's culture, or even Edo mythology. But I recently acted as cultural collaborator for the Nigerian Pavilion for the London Design Biennale. And for that, they wanted me to speak about certain topics from my position as a Yoruba and Edo woman. And so one of the first questions they asked me with the research questions that they gave me was, where do Yoruba and Edo people come from? And for me, it would have been it would have been more grounded rather to explore like migration patterns and stuff. But I'm interested in the cosmic. That is, I am interested in the fantasy story. So when they asked me that question, my response was to go and look at the creation myths in each of the cultures and where they say they came from as a people. So probably around the time I was making this body of work, as well as works that you probably saw today, I was looking at Yoruba and Edo creation myths, which are quite similar. So the Yoruba creation myth is it tells the story. It says that the primordial state of the earth was just skies and ocean water, and that in the heavens, the supreme deity Olodumare, he sends, or one of the younger deities, Obatala, went to Olodumare and requested permission to create life on earth. And then there was this whole story of him getting the materials going in this journey and getting a gold chain, a chicken, some sand, and he hooked his chain to one corner of the sky and then came down to earth and then poured the sand from a snail shell into the ocean and then dropped the chicken on that, and the chicken is the creature that kicks the sand around to create land. So the Edo mythology is very similar. So I've been looking at those sorts of mythologies recently. So for that pavilion, I actually wrote an essay called The Design of the Divine that looks at how scientific theories are embedded in those mythologies. So for example, the idea of that chicken kicking the sand around, how that echoes ideas of infinite expansion, like in science. So those are the ones I've been into lately.
Okay, so I will continue with my question, and is in your written exploration of the concept of the within that you have created, you describe this epitome of interwoven lives, past, and future, with great precision. This spiritual within, if I have understood correctly, applies equally to all people and is comparable to mythical worlds such as those of the Nordic saga. You also mention the world ash tree Yggdrasil, for example. This tree has huge roots at the bottom, a place of judgment for the gods in the middle, and mythical animals in its branches. The tree connects heaven and earth, and indeed, there are similarities with your depictions of your cosmogony. What I find interesting is that the historical medieval sources about Yggdrasil were very vague. It was important to leave enough room for interpretation to allow the myth to be passed on in society for a long time. Your visual and written representations, however, are very concrete. To what extent are these concrete visual and textual representations in particular important for your artistic approach?
I mean, so for me, that also, I guess, links back to the different iterations of my practice there has been, because there were those exhibitions where I had little to no text being like explaining so much, and now it's much stricter, I guess. And for me, it's more clearly an exploration of very specific things. So, for example, when I mentioned exhibitions like Lands of the Living, or the exhibition I have on right now, Clouds Never Die, in London, in Tafeta, they are explorations of afterlife. And so it was exploring my own relationship with grief and my own way of studying different religions and different cosmologies and seeing how they present afterlife and ghosts, which is why for that I created a very concise framework. So very much land of the living, land of the dead, separated by water, connected by palm trees, and exploring how these figures bounce between the realms, because that's when I introduced the concept of that. That's when I explained within that when someone dies in within, that their dust body falls away and their essence evaporates into a cloud-like form in the spiritual realm. So, and since then I've been looking at the relationship between those two. So I think sometimes it really ties, as a creator, having really tight frameworks can bring really interesting things about. Like I think I've times in my practice where I'm just free flowing and willing to be more vague and more open-ended. I think those are just different parts of the process. Because there's some years where when I get to the paper, I don't have much planned. And I let my work come very intuitively, and then that ends up being I end up having to study the works afterwards and try and uncover and find the links and then build an entire body of works off of a singular work that I didn't quite understand. So similarly, some of the works that now have this very tight framework were born from works that maybe came to me in a dream that I did not understand. So it's me having these images first, like you mentioned, and then excavating and studying. I was like, well, why did I think to do this? Like, why is my brain doing that? Going through those themes and applying them to existing frameworks and cultures and making sense of life and reality. Because at the end of the day, the whole part of within being my interior world is about it's just being a reflection of how I, as an individual, am moving through life and how I am exploring the things I am exploring as an individual.
Okay, very nice. There is Heidi having a question. Okay. You just have to put it up.
So I would also be interested in the visual language you are using. So and also so what we have in the exhibition, the cave, which all of you saw now, this is basically drawing, and you have printing, and so there is a lot of abstraction in it. So could you bit explain where the visual language comes from, and why you use this variety of techniques to create your worlds?
Thank you for the question. So I combine painting, drawing, and printmaking. So the first layer of that process is the painting, which just is setting the color tone of each work. And I guess the punchy distinction is between the drawing and the printmaking. Because since I'm exploring ghosts and afterlife and the unseen, that is where printmaking comes in. So when I look at living beings, for example, like when I'm looking at a living human being, that is when I draw a figure. But for example, when I want to depict a figure that is unseen, so like a ghost or a god of sorts or a spirit, that's when I print them. So it's about, and with printmaking, they have that translucent feel of not being there, but like just a glimmer or a hint of them is there in some sorts. I can see through them. So that is why I create that juxtaposition between drawing and printmaking. And even and in this exhibition in particular, we have the braids as well around the space. And that began very tongue-in-cheek. It began with the fact that the world is in my head, like I said. So instead of having grass growing from the ground, I wanted hair to grow from the ground. So you can see that in some of the works in the exhibition, when you look at the landscapes, that instead of grass, it's hair growing from the ground. And so the whole concept of the cave as an exhibition was looking at the early beginnings of this world. And so I wanted the viewer to feel like they were entering an ancient cave that had this knowledge about this world and the early parts that not many people are cognizant of. So the braids hanging in the space end up feeling like tendrils, like you maybe had to see and sift through to get through. And then on the outside, that's when I had the more diagrammatic works. And those are newer in my practice. And I think, again, that was my own personal struggle over the years where, like I said, people often engaged my work on a very aesthetic surface level and not necessarily being able to buy into the more theoretical, denser philosophical aspects. And so since last year, I started doing more of these diagrammatic works, which is also interesting, again, with me as just a person, because most people I went to school with as a child in Nigeria thought I was going to become a mathematician or an engineer. So they were very shocked when I became an artist. So either with that language of me having a more mathematical, systematic way of thinking has come into my art making.
Oh, thank you. There is a question in the audience.
Hi. Thanks for allowing me to go first. Yeah, hi, Bunmi.
Hello.
Thanks for sharing your essay with us and, welcoming us into your world of artistic expression. I think it's been lovely. When I got the email from Annika, I instantly looked you up, and I was going to send you a message that, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you tonight. But it obviously it's been equally engaging, and I feel very connected to your work. What I wanted to just say is, a short question. You've spoken of the theme of grief that you kind of explore with these bodies just disappearing into dust in the manner that you showed it in the picture. I'm wondering if you've also explored the theme of just mere joy or happiness, or has that never been a thing that you've explored in your work so far? Just if there's anything, just feel free to share.
Thank you for the question. Also, thank you for connecting with the work and having it resonate with you. I believe I have, I think, because basically every solo exhibition I have has explored what I'm just, I guess, really, really thinking about in life. And I think at the end of the day, the joyfulness comes through more in perhaps the color palette of the work, because and the vibrancy of the works. So even though, again, as a person, I'm complex, I'm exploring these very sad themes at times, but I'm still going about my life and having joyful moments and still approaching these topics with a very joyful lens. Because again, it is, even though these works are about, a lot of my works of late are about grief, it's still also about celebrating life, which is very pertinent in my culture as well. So it also, like, for example, Clouds Never Die, the show that I have on in London, it's about the fact that death is not an endpoint but a transition, and it's about still knowing that your loved ones are with us, like the loved ones are with us in some capacity, which is still meant to end on a joyous note of sorts. But even beyond that, I think I've had other exhibitions that are just, I've had figures dancing in works. I think the most joyful exhibition I would say I've done was it was called Outside, and it was in Lagos. So it was the only exhibition I've actually done in my hometown, and it was a homecoming of sorts. And in that exhibition, I explored, also the works kind of touched on this idea of representing a family home. So for example, I had like a small table with small drawings that were meant to mimic family photos, but had these fantastical twists on them. So again, also like children playing, children swimming, but certainly one of them has like a lizard's tail, and those kind of random gestures. I think, yeah, with the grief that was born from my father's passing in 2023. And so at the end of the day, I feel like it's only been like 2 exhibitions mainly that I've looked at grief like head on, but it's also just been added to the world, like the frameworks. Because I looked at the first theme I looked at was cultural migration, because that's what I was going through closer to 2020, 2021. So looking at those themes, okay, that ended up being part of the story. And then the next chapter of the story is then looking at, okay, the domestic space grief, afterlife. So the way, when you have a world, you can explore as many themes as you want. So it might be a thing of I end up exploring like commerce next, and these sort of things. It gives me lots of flexibility.
Can I ask a question? Yeah, thank you so much. I'm also really enjoying your essay and your explanations right now. And from your answer just now, you gave a few clues for the question I had in mind. I'm still going to ask it. Maybe it brings up more. But when you spoke about what informed your work, you mentioned mythologies, past narratives. You spoke about fantasy, afterlives, and for me, fantasy also always has to do with imaginaries about the future. And I wonder, so we have the past, we have the future. In what way does the present inform or inspire your work, particularly now that the present is more and more becoming such a troubled space? So it's also not fun to engage with it, I guess, in certain ways. So what role does the present play for you?
I would actually say it's probably like of past, present, and future. I probably mostly engage with present, especially my present. But then at the end of the day, by the time I think through a body of work, I do the brainstorming, I do the research, I make the works have gone to the framers, the works comes to the exhibition. By the time the work is exhibited, it then feels like past. So in actuality, it says my present, but yes, the present is very troubled at the moment. But it's, again, due to that process. My explorations of this current present won't come until the future. But yeah, I would say I usually explain my work as fantastical retellings of my life. So it's often as I'm going through these things. I actually feel like I rarely look at future, because I don't know what the future holds. And the closest I come to dealing with the future is when I make a work based on a dream, because I don't know where it's coming from, and then gradually in the future I uncover it. So it is this weird bending of time. And like Stephanie mentioned in one of my essays, I've also challenged the linearity of time as a whole. Because I wrote about, again, through the lens of afterlife, just looking at the nature of existence. I was speaking about how when a figure dies and goes to the afterlife, in whichever conceptions we have besides there being nothing, there often is this metaphysical waiting room, whether that's heaven, hell, purgatory. But then either way, that concept is often depicted as not existing in linear time. And time does operate there the same way it does on Earth, basically, and in the land of the living. So if in the afterlife, if like a soul is exposed to the past, present, and future, then they have access to all sorts of information. They have access to information lost in ancient societies, for example, like in the burning of the Library of Alexandria, like the information that would have been in there, and scientific discoveries we haven't even made yet. So in a way, the ghosts becomes this very technologically advanced being, because they have access to so much information and they have it all the time to learn it. So it's then challenges this entire idea of who is advanced and what is past, what is present, what's future.
Okay, so maybe I have another question, please.
I have also a question, but
Okay.
you go first.
Oh, thank you. Because this is like we talked about Afrofuturism and African futurism and Jujuism. That is part that plays a significant role in your work. And I just want to come back to the literature. And so the Jujuism, as I understood, is the humanization of objects. That is the attribution of agency, the ability to act. And that's nothing new in literature. If we consider Aladdin's magic lamp, for example, or other objects with magical powers that want or have to serve a particular person. And in your work, you describe Jujuism in such a way that objects are attributed magical powers or have them themselves. The presence of spiritual ancestors plays an important role in animism, and this extends to the entire cosmology of indigenous African religions. Objects endowed with magical powers play an immensely important role in the everyday lives of people who are culturally shaped by West Africa. That is what you write. So in the text that I studied, there is Fatou Diom, one author. She is a Senegalese French author. Her novel, Ketala, is about the everyday objects of a woman called Memoria, a programmatic name. After Memoria's death, her objects, among others, the sofa, the mattress, a mask, a busty female statue, an old pearl necklace, a wristwatch, start talking to each other. They argue about who was most important to the deceased and therefore learned the most about her. They mock the match, for example, saying it was unimportant because of its short lifespan. And they make fun of the handkerchief because of its insignificant function. Through these statements, the reader learns all about the life of the deceased. Each individual object has taken on a part of the deceased owner, and together they can portray the entire life and personality of Memoria. Is this method of humanizing objects in any way related to Jujuism?
Perhaps. I think it's also related to, again, a wider framework of fantasy storytelling, because or even just ways of reviewing one's life. Because immediately you started describing the story, I was reminded of a British poet, Philip Larkins, I believe he was British, Philip Larkins' poem, Mr. Bleeny's Room. And basically with that poem, it's about a man who has passed away and his objects are still in his bedroom, in his apartment. And there's some new tenants coming in to potentially rent the apartment. And the agent or whoever is giving a tour of the apartment, and the poem is written from the perspective of these new tenants looking at the objects in the room and trying to paint a picture of Mr. Bleeny just through his objects. So very similarly, that happens. But I think where Jujuism would come into that would be how the spirit is imbued in objects, in matter. So whether it's objects or human form or animal form. So for example, if we actually even look at Octavia Butler, an American sci-fi writer, in her Patronus series, there's someone who has the power to, like, the supernatural ability to hold an object and know the history of an object. And again, even looking at like people being, like, matter being necessary to imbue spirits and stories. We can even go back to the creation myths I was looking at. And I mentioned the Yoruba myth, but in the Edo myth, with the creation of Earth, there were 4 brothers who came down to Earth, and they were given different gifts. The oldest 3 brothers took, I think, about like wisdom, knowledge, and wealth, something like that. And the 4th brother was left with the snail shell filled with sand. And he thought it was a horrible gift. Like, his brothers were making fun of him. And when they came down to Earth, they were sitting on their boots, because, like I said, it was all water and just sky. So they were sitting on their boots, nowhere to dock their boots or do anything on Earth. So it was until the 4th brother poured the sand into this water and land was created. But then the sand also gave him the ability to take on a human form. And so with that story, and then I guess continuing from that story, the older brothers had to beg the younger brother to allow their gifts to be imbued in something, into matter. So if you have wealth, what does wealth mean if you don't have a coin or a bank account, or like what is the materialization? So philosophically, it's an interesting question all in all, but Jujuism, the distinction that I end up making between Afrofuturism, African Jujuism, and African Futurism and Jujuism is mostly born from the writings of Nnedi Okorafor, who established the terms African futurism and African Jujuism. So Afrofuturism generally is very broad. It's just extremely broad, and it's like a lens for life. It could almost be a religion because it looks at metaphysics, it looks at astrology, it looks at so many things, but it has a very out there way of looking at a story. But looking at Jujuism, Nnedi Okorafor defined Jujuism as a subcategory of fantasy that combines the imaginative with true existing African cosmologies. So when we're looking at the idea of the masquerade, or again, like an object being imbued with power, that is where Jujuism is just way more grounded and is closer to magical realism than a very big out there fantasy.
Okay, thank you. So yes, it's your turn, I think.
Thank you. How do you feel about your artwork being connected to surrealism?
Hello, thanks for the question. It's very connected as well, because again, all these, I guess when I'm speaking about Afrofuturism, African Jujuism, like it feels like I'm trying to be like, oh, this is different, but it's more of a Venn diagram where there are overlaps between several of these categories. So with surrealism, it definitely links to my practice with certain works. So I'm also not the biggest proponent of saying that, oh, this person is a Jujuist maker, this person is a surrealist maker, because there's some works I've made that are more surrealist than Jujuist. And so, yeah, surrealism definitely plays a part in my practice where with the works where I more heavily rely on my unconscious mind or subconscious mind. And so the works that are more so born from dreams, I would say. But it is part of the wider process. It's just not the only thing.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So first of all, thank you for your works and words and all the paintings. And my question is a bit about childhood and imaginary world and like being able to connect to that. Would you say that as a kid when you were growing up and then now, if you would compare your ability to grasp this like imaginary world or like this more abstracted world with visions or dreams or just like feelings, if it was more when you were growing up as a child, or if it's more now, or is it more or less the same, or if that changed with the environment that you live in or the country and the culture, like how was your journey with this connection?
Thank you. That's an interesting question. I wouldn't say it's definitely not linked to where I am at a point. I move so much that it's not. But for me as a child, I think like I was very big on video games. I'm still very big on video games. I loved the idea of an imaginary friend, but I could never conjure up one in my mind. I always wanted to have
Me
one,
too.
but I couldn't do it.
I had one for so long.
Oh, lucky. But I remember, for example, I I would say that I still had that world building tendency because I was still playing things like The Sims. But also, I remember one day I took pieces of cardboard and I stapled it together and created like a structure, what was meant to be a house. It had many holes, and I wrote Ant Farm or Ant Hotel on it, and I put it outside the house, and I put a slice of bread in, and I had tons of ants come in, and then to my parents' horror, I brought it back into the house, and we had an ant infestation for a while because I wanted to have an ant hotel. So basically I was trying to be an architect, and I was like, okay, I'm building this hotel for ants, and that did not work out. So that's how that manifested then. I think in more like teenage years, I'm a very vivid dreamer. I used to be able to remember my dreams like spot on. I can no longer do that. I'm trying to rebuild that skill. But I think now but I'm probably best to my abstract thinking than I ever was in the past. Now, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another question from the audience.
Is it on? Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you so much also for sharing all the insights and yeah, for sharing your inner world. My question would be kind of a follow-up on what works or what influences inspired your work. Like, were there any particular books you were reading or any artworks from other artists or music or, I don't know, like anything that inspired you to come up with what you're doing now on the path?
Yeah, many. For example, I'm a big fan of Marvel. I'm a big Marvel fan. So very big on superhero films, but specifically Marvel because it's so the universe that they've created that's actually probably one of the main influences for me when it comes to world building, because they have so many aspects of the universe that they've created. They have the more political grounded storylines. They have the more cosmic space questions. They have the ones about gods, and it's just about how all these points of views interact. And it's just so complex and real, even though it's fantasy. So I'll say Marvel is a massive one because actually I think it was after Infinity War, the film. So that must have been like 2019, 2018, 2019. I watched Infinity War, and that's when I ended up going on YouTube. Well, first of all, I rewatched all the Marvel films. That's because I didn't realize how big of a world they were creating. So that's when I rewatched all the films. I went on YouTube, started watching all the breakdowns of every film and how this film, this Easter egg, where okay, this object pops up in this movie again, and that's why this happens, and those kind of connections. And that's when I was like, whoa, they just built an entire world for years, and each movie was its own chapter of a story. And that's what inspired me to approach my own practice the same way when like each solo exhibition became a chapter of the story. And now people who have followed my work for a long time can look back to an exhibition and be like, oh, that character did this before, which is why they're doing this, which is why this happened, which is the fun of it.
Gustav?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah. First of all, I want to congratulate you for a wonderful show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I want to ask, like, you know, we're talking about Africa mythology and things like incantation or divination is very strong. So I was wondering, is there any space in your work for especially divination where maybe, you know, because in Africa mythology, I think we usually have intermediaries that in some of our cultures, especially in Yoruba, where you have the Ifa, that, you know, if you're looking for, especially when your work deals with a lot of, yeah, like dreams, concepts that are very abstract. Do you see yourself maybe as a diviner or something like that?
Oh. The funny thing about this question is that I feel like many people have asked me this question in different iterations in recent months. Again, it's similar to the beginning of my essay when other people have looked at me and looked at my work and been like, oh, you're a philosopher. And I was like, oh, I am. Interesting. And then similarly, I've had people in recent months see my work and they're like, oh, you're like a messenger for the divine. I'm like, I am. Like I was just doing my work. So I'm definitely not coming at it with this like grand sense of purpose. But in terms of the idea of being an intermediary, at the end of the day, within the work, I do have characters who embody that. Because it's a world and their characters. So one of the characters, for example, she was born with tribal marks on her cheeks, and behind those tribal marks, she has eyes. And when she uses those eyes, she can see ghosts and apparitions. So in a sense, she is an intermediary character. But me, for myself, I think of myself more so as a vessel to access my own sense of like the abstract divine, which is it within, like the world I've created, which again, also people, I am of the belief that also people have a version of within in themselves. and there are lots of that is interconnected for us, and it's almost like, well, I guess I've been looking at lots of religion generally, and how every religion and every cosmology, the divine is this very abstract thing, and also people just find ways to describe the divine according to the environment they were in at the time. So that's why I'm looking at comparative mythology, and that's a practicing where people study different myths and religions and find the parallels. So that's why I mentioned Axis Mundi, for example, as a concept, like the palm tree, as a spot where the divine accesses the material realm. So how in Christianity, the Axis Mundi is Mount Sinai, because that's where Moses got the 10 Commandments from God. And then in Islam, it's Mount Hira, because that's where Allah gave the Prophet Muhammad the Quran. And then it's different in Norse mythology, but then in Yoruba mythology is the palm tree. So the idea of we're all kind of interacting with this abstract divine that we can really put words and images to based off of the environments we have. Because in Yoruba land, it's a tropical landscape. So of course, the palm tree is going to be the palm tree as opposed to the mountain. So those kind of questions, I think.
Okay, so we have to finish, I think. I have a lot of other questions. I wrote a lot of stuff, but we cannot manage it all now. Maybe another day, we two together. And thank you very much. I find your world very healing. I would like to ask a last question for the future. For example, as you are a gamer, could you see a computer game being developed based on your images, colors, shapes, figures, and texts? I find it could be a nice idea, because I find, for me personally, your text, your paintings, your drawings, your visual art is really, it touches me in a, yeah, like healing manner. Thank you.
That has been brought up to me in the past. I think within I imagine more of like an animated film, but I would actually love to create like a separate video game. I am thinking of long term in life. I do want to be involved in a video game at some point. So yes.
Very good idea.
To show it here first, yes?
Okay, I finish. Thank you very much, Bunmi Agusto, for this wonderful insight into your writing and your artistic work. I'm deeply impressed and take away important new insights. I wish you all the very best for your future. And I think we will be hearing a lot more from you in the future. Many thanks also to you, the audience. And now, if you want, you have enough time to visit the exhibition.
So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Stephanie and to Heidi and to everyone for coming.
So thank you also, Stephanie, for this nice conversation. And those who haven't seen the exhibitions, they are open for half an hour. You can take your time and go through. And thank you for coming and for the conversation. And yeah, please do come again. Thank you.